Avengers Infinite Wars Chapter 3. Republic to the Rescue. Anakin Skywalker, Jedi Knight of the Ancient Order, stood upon the bridge of his personal ship the Resolute. All around him were clone pilots and troopers going about their own business of maintaining ship functions, communications, as well as making sure to stay on alert for any separatist movements or attacks. It was a stressful job, but such was the life of a Jedi. It was strange to think that more than 10 years ago, Anakin was nothing more than a slave boy on Tatooine, who was just a little pod racer to now being a commanding general in the Grand Army of the Republic. At the thought of Tatooine, Anakin envisioned his lost mother and closed his eyes, trying to conceal the pain he still held at losing her. Master? Anakin glanced to his side to see his young Padawan Ahsoka Tano, looking up to him in concern. Are you alright? Ahsoka asked. Yeah, I'm fine. Anakin waved off. Are you sure? Ahsoka pressed on. You got all intense there for a second. Anakin was internally touched by his Padawan's concern for him, playfully shoving her head down slightly before pulling her in for a side hug while giving her a noogie. Aw, my little Snips has already grown to care for me. Anakin teased. Ugh, Master. Ahsoka whined childishly, attempting to free herself from Anakin's grasp. Let me go. Not unlikely, my young Padawan, for I have the high ground. You only say that because you're tall. I see the two of you are getting along in your usual way of passing time, said an amused sage-like voice from behind. Both Jedi turned to see Skywalker's old master and friend, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Just a friendly little lesson in humility, Anakin said offhandedly, making an over-exaggerated grunt from being elbowed lightly by Ahsoka. Shaking his head at their antics, Obi-Wan gestured for them both to follow. Come on, the others are waiting, the three of us, Obi-Wan said, walking towards the main meeting area of the Resolute with Ahsoka and Anakin in tow. Approaching the holo table, Clone Commander Cody along Clone Captain Rex were waiting for their three Jedi generals and commander. Both wore customized clone trooper armor to distinguish themselves amongst their brothers, with Cody sporting orange markings and armor plating, while Rex had blue accents and plated shoulder armor over his right side. They're waiting on us, General. Commander Cody addressed Obi-Wan directly. Then let's not keep them waiting, Obi-Wan said and turned on the holocom link. Many individuals appeared around the table through transmissions. It was a large assembly of both Jedi and their clone commanders that were paired up with them. Jedi Master Plo Koon along with Commander Wolf were beside Cody and Obi-Wan. Aayla Secura and Commander Bly beside Anakin, Ahsoka and Rex. And around the table were Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Luminara Unduli, Eid Koth and Jedi Grandmaster Yoda. With them were also their clone commander and captains Pons, Dakar, Gree, Locke and Thyre. While all were attentive and present within the meeting, Yoda appeared distant as his eyes were faced downward with his expression conveying deep thought. Master Yoda. Mace Windu spoke to the Green Jedi. We're all here. Yoda perked up, noticing the meeting has begun. Apologies, friends. Deep in thought, I am. The Force, a change has occurred. While the Jedi wished to ask just what it was that Yoda detected, they knew that now was not the time for such a thing, with Aayla Secura deciding to begin the meeting. After Skywalker and Tano's successful mission on Tath and Tatooine, we have established a firm route within Hutt space. Aayla supplied, a map of the galaxy appearing in between the meeting, and highlighting the outer rim in Hutt space. We've managed to create several bases along several key access points and strongholds here and here. Commander Bly added on, gesturing to several areas within their newly acquired areas. We've been having to deal with some pirates and other outlaws every now and then, Clone Commander Bakar stated. But that's usually been on the outskirts of Hutt space. What of our own individual missions? Mace Windu inquired to the collective. My fleet has moved in assisting the 224th Legion on Mimban, Eid Koth stated. We'll be scrapping the clankers with the mud jumpers for the time being, Commander Locke stated. Successful I have been, yes, Yoda declared. Negotiated into an alliance with King Kachunko and his people. A strong ally the Republic has gained. More good news, Anakin said with a smirk of admiration at the little master. Dooku and Grievous have been relatively silent, however. Luminara mused aloud. After their failure in securing the Hutt's allegiance, my fleet has only picked up on sporadic movements. The same on my end, Plo Koon said. And mine has yielded similar results, Windu said with a frown. The Count awaits for an opportune strike, he does, Yoda said stoically, closing his eyes at the mention of his old student. To throw the Republic off balance, his goal is. Throwing us off balance would be his next play after his recent failures. Obi-Wan said, thinking over what the Sith Lord may attempt next. He's been successful in doing so since the start of the war. It's why we're still stretched so thin even after consolidating our new regiments and legions of troopers. He may go for a more unpredictable target and attack then. Commander Cody surmised, following along with the thought process of his commanding general. So then where would he strike? Mace Windu asked to no one in particular. The assembled Jedi clones were silent in these regard, all trying to figure out as to what the Count and by extension the Separatists might pull next within this war. It was at this time that Yoda let out a grunt, something several Jedi and the Grand Master's clone commander noticed. "What's the matter, General?" Thyra asked straight away. Yoda was about to speak when all assembled Jedi either held expressions of shock or let out gasps, as they felt a great shockwave within the Force strike them all. Their clone commanders, captains and other nearby troopers from all of their individual ships were all by their side, due to the simultaneous similar reactions each one of them had. "What was that?" Bly asked aloud. "Is everyone alright?" Cody inquired, somewhat panicked, standing closer to Kenobi as he seemed as though he were about to pass out. "Commander, can you stand?" Rex was crouching next to Ahsoka, who had actually fallen to her knees, clutching her head. Anakin was also rubbing his forehead, gritting his teeth to fight off the oncoming headache. "By the Force, what was that?" Luminara exclaimed somewhat tiredly as she leaned upon Commander Green for support. "The great disturbance, no, great change within the Force, something had occurred," Yoda said solemnly, with Thyra kneeling down to him in case the Master may have a similar reaction like the other Jedi. "That was something else entirely," Mace said, patting a silent appreciative hand upon Pon's arm, who had helped in keeping him standing. The Force plow was leaning upon the table on his end. It was not a warning. It did not feel like one. "What did the Force tell you then?" Bly couldn't help but ask as he hovered over Isla Sakura, who was recovering now. "'Cause it looks to me like it hurt all of you more than it gave you a heads up." He got nods and grunts of agreement from the rest of his clone brethren. "Appreciate the concern, give us you have." Yoda spoke on behalf of the Jedi. "But dwell on such a matter, we must at a later date. Rages on, the war does as we speak." As soon as Yoda finished that statement, Rex had noticed a blinking light upon the table. "Generals, incoming transmission," Rex announced to all present, not waiting for a response as he activated the link. In the center of the table appeared a holo transmission of Senators Padme Amidala, Bail Organa and Ryo Chuchi. "Padme?" Anakin said in surprise and underlying worry. The look in her eyes and her tense posture. Something was wrong. "Attention all Republic forces within the area, this is an open broadcast message of Senator Padme Amidala. The Separatist forces have launched a full-scale attack upon Naboo, and they've been assaulting the planet and the orbital defense fleet. We've been holding out, but more Separatist forces have been arriving as the assault went on." Organa then added in his part of the message. "The Republic forces are holding out, but if help doesn't arrive soon, Naboo will be overrun and taken by the Separatist army." Ryuchuchi then added. "There are many civilians, senators, noblemen and the Queen holed up in the palace, with many others still in danger across the capital city. Please, to whoever can help, Naboo needs you." Padme finished, the message ending. Panic exploded from within Anakin, whilst the rest of the Jedi were greatly disturbed by the sudden attack upon Naboo. To think the Separatists would strike again so soon after their recent loss, Windu murmured. "And to target the Chancellor's and Senator Amidala's homeworld on top of that," Obi-Wan added, frowning at the prospect. "She wasn't alone either," Cody noted aloud. "She was with other senators when sending out the distress call. There could be other senators on Naboo as we speak." "A literal pen of bantha fodder for the droid army," Plo said grimly. "We need to act fast," Anakin declared. "Both mine and Obi-Wan's fleet is a jump away from Naboo." "My fleet is not that far off neither," Isla said aloud. "As is mine," Plo chimed in. "Then go, the four of you all must," Yoda said, not allowing any room for further debate. "The Force answers we all seek begin at Naboo. One step at a time then," Mace said, facing the 5 Jedi Knights in Padawan, about to undertake the counterattack against the Separatist invasion of Naboo. "May the Force be with you all." The transmissions all cut off save for Plo's and Isla's that remained on. There was more to the transmission than just a message, General, Rex said whilst all around them the preparations for hyperspace and battle were being set. They managed to get a gauge of the amount of ships the Separatists and Anakin asked. What are we dealing with? Damn near close to an invading force, Rex said, throwing up a display of nearly several dozen separatists with mix of 3 capital ship star destroyers, along with frigates, Lucrehulk battleships, dreadnoughts and his anti-class cruisers. They've gone in prepared, Obi-Wan noted with utter seriousness. The Naboo defense fleet can only hold out for so long, Cody said militarily. If they've already got forces on the ground, then unless we don't hurry, the fleet is going to be completely overrun and destroyed. Then we must make haste, Plo said. Skywalker, Kenobi, the 2 of your fleets are on the northern end of the jump, so my fleet shall come in from behind theirs, with Ilas hitting them on this side. A 3-pronged attack then. Anakin nodded. Let's do it. The Jedi sent out commands to all their ships to prep all fighters and gunships for landing, and have all crew stand by for battle. Anakin was tense the entire time, thoughts occupied by the safety of his wife. He knew that she was more than capable in handling herself in a life and death scenario, as she had already been in more than enough for one lifetime. But still, as a husband, it is only natural for him to worry because of course Padme has admitted the same since the start of the war. But right now, he was on his way to save her, and he'd be damned if anything stood in his way. However, a thought occurred to him, something that was shared amongst his fellow Jedi next to him were now thinking on as well. Yoda spoke of answers being found on Naboo, or at the very least the start of it. What did that mean? Answers will start to be found upon Naboo, Obi-Wan said aloud, breaking the silence of the Jedi and their cloned counterparts that stood with them. You too, huh? Anakin said knowingly. What did Master Yoda mean by that? Ahsoka asked the 2 veteran Jedi. We'll know when we get to Naboo, Obi-Wan said firmly. Or an idea, at the very least. Let's hope so, Anakin said, grimacing slightly. With Naboo and the whole Force seizure, I'd like to know just what's going on. We all do, Anakin, Obi-Wan said, placing a hand upon Anakin's shoulder. We just need some patience. Anakin rolled his eyes good-naturedly. By we you really mean me, don't you? Well, if you insist, Obi-Wan retorted with a wry grin. Scene cut. Steve Rogers jumped back to dodge the next onset of plasma fire directed towards him, giving his hand a downward motion. Behind him were a unit of clones, amongst them being some of the clones he and Sam had first met when they arrived here. Chalk and Jolly waited patiently for the captain to make his move. Quickly eyeing a balcony on the building to the left of him, Cap calculated the trajectory of his shield, taking note of the nearby pillars of the other building on the right. Turning back to the clones following him, Steve made a series of gestures pointing out the thick pillars on the side with an arch of his free arm, and held up 3 fingers, signaling a countdown. The clones all nodded, tensing up as they prepared for Cap's move. Counting down the digits, upon clenching his hand into a fist, Steve rolled out from cover and threw his shield at the balcony. This move startled some of the droids as they had expected to have been hit, yet they remained unscathed. That changed the second the clones rushed out from cover, taking to the pillars nearby as cover while firing at the droids. Cap's shield in the meantime bounced off the balcony he threw it at, and proceeded to cleave through a line of droids. Hitting the ground, it angled upwards through more droids before sliding back into the waiting arm of its owner, who then proceeded to bash a super battle droid into a wall. The droid shattered upon impact, while Steve continued in decimating the droid squadron that the clones aided him in destroying. This is Steve Rogers. Cap spoke into a new set of comms directly linked to the palace. Sector 284 is secure. We're done on our end here, Cap. Falcon chimed in, who had gone off with Scott and a number of clones to fight off their own battalion of battle droids. Still can't believe we're not on Earth anymore, Scott murmured through the comms, making Sam snort in amusement. You can go into some kind subatomic universe, but this here freaks you out. Sam of course was hiding his own shock as he himself was still in a bit of disbelief. They all were for that matter. However, that's not what currently occupied the mind of the leader of the Avengers. Steve had been eyeing Senator Padme for several moments now, trying to put a name on her face other than Padme Amidala. He had seen that face somewhere before, but he just couldn't figure out where at the moment. Shaking his head, Steve decided now wasn't the best time to dwell on names and focus on the here and now. After driving off that would-be assassin named Ventress, Scott had a blaster pointed at him momentarily courtesy of Captain Panaka. Apparently, Scott had inadvertently stirred up some commotion in the palace, as that was apparently where he was found. Of course, after discovering that Scott's mouth got him in trouble by accident, along with Panaka's own intimidating questioning of how Ant-Man had gotten into the palace led them to a small confrontation. Thankfully, Senator Amidala and Organa had calmed Panaka down, simply stating that if Scott was with the two men who had saved Padm's sister and niece and his nephew, then he is to be trusted. Soon after, Steve had spoken to the Queen and the assembled senators and noblemen on the state of Theed and the attacking droid army. Though the fighting was scattered, more droid forces were entering both the city and the planet by the second, while they idly sat to the side and waited for the Republic for aid. Picking up on Cap's thought process, Padme had agreed in sending him out there and backing the city up, and getting the civilians to safe zones, as that was a greater priority in mind, than simply sitting on their bums and doing nothing. When the clones that had traveled with Cap and Falcon caught wind of the two going back out there to fight against the droids, they rushed in to help, eager to get back in the fight and drive the droids off. Steve of course was appreciative of them volunteering, but made it important that their mission was to primarily get the civilians to safety. Along with several Naboo guards, Steve had led a string of successful skirmishes against the droid army within the city, creating a strong line of defenses that kept expanding with every victory. Thanks to the participation of the trio of heroes, they had managed to keep casualties to a bare minimum, though they were beginning to pile up. They had received news of Republic force en route to Naboo, but they would have to wait for the time being, and hold out just a little while longer. During that time, Steve, Sam and Scott had continually amazed the people of Naboo, the soldiers and the other senators and royal individuals, with their skills and aptitude for combat. Steve and Sam had a particular set of fans in the form of the clone troopers, who found themselves easily swaying into their command, and rallying to their side at a moment's notice. Scott of course was a particular oddity for many, including some of the off-worlders, as they had seen many strange and unusual things even by GD standards, yet Scott's powers were something that they barely comprehend. Regardless, Ant-Man's reputation was held in the same light as Cap's and Falcon's, due to his contributions in repelling the droid army. "Sir?" Steve blinked and saw that it was Chalk speaking to him. "Are you alright, Captain? You looked like you were out of it." "Just a lot on my mind right now, Chalk," Steve assured. "What's the sitrep on the state of the city?" "We're pushing back the Separatist army street by street," Chalk said, holding up a disc-like contraption that brought forth a holographic projection of Theed. "Thanks to your strategy, sir, we've established the defenses both on the ground and our anti-aircraft guns. And the civilian population. All accounted for, sir," Chalk said. "We've gotten word from the Gungan cities that they have taken in a considerable sum of people for safety, and the rest are all here in the palace and other safe bunkers." "Good to know," Steve said, patting Chalk on the shoulder. "Well done, trooper. Take 5, all of you." "Take 5, sir?" Jolly asked. Steve stared at the clones until blinking in realization. "Oh right. That's a saying on my home planet. It means take a moment to rest. You'll need it." "Appreciated, sir," Chalk said, turning back to give the go-ahead for the rest of clones to take a break. Steve held a slight reminiscent smile at the sight of the clones, all bantering and japing with one another. "God's righteous man." Roger's head snapped around behind him with a sharp intake of breath. His eyes darted about everywhere, trying to find the source of the voice. Hand placed over his beating heart, Steve steadied his breath with a clear face of bewildered fear. That voice was too familiar and too personal. He rubbed his forehead to soothe an oncoming headache, mind returning to his current predicament. Steve along with Sam and Scott were on an alien world in the middle of a war that they had no idea as to how and why it started. The rest of the Avengers were God knows where, and now they had thrown themselves into conflict. Granted, the sight of seeing innocent men, women and children being harassed by droids certainly was more than enough of a motivation to get into the fight. But this was not their fight in the end. Cap honestly wasn't sure what to do at this very moment. Aside from finding the others, he was at a loss on what to do here. This was uncharted territory, and he certainly wasn't sure of how to get into contact with Thor, as he's the only extraterrestrial who truly knows the machinations of space travel. Or at least his version of it. However, Thor was out of reach, as were the other Avengers back on Earth, along with Fury and his contacts. They were stuck here on this planet, which means they'd have to figure out their own way of finding the others and making it back home. Without even realizing, Steve had undertaken a massive task beyond his understanding, yet he internally decided to run straight forward towards this challenge. In the background, some of the clones were looking over their equipment with their helmets off, and a few chewing on some rations. "Man, I never would have thought the Seps would have the nerve to attack Naboo of all places." A clone trooper with tattoos of curved horns on both sides of his neck. "This is a Republic stronghold. Hell, ain't it the Chancellor's homeworld? That's what Sergeant Buck said, Ram. Jolly noted, wiping away some grime from his helmet. Right after we met Captain Rogers there and Lieutenant Wilson. So who are they then? Another clone, this one more in line with the default look of a clone. Not sure really. Chalk murmured, rubbing his chin. We kinda met them at where we were stationed. They just appeared out of nowhere when I really think about it. So do you think they could be separatist spies? Ram asked, side-eyeing Captain Rogers who had his back facing them. Not likely. Jolly waved off immediately. If it weren't for him and his two comrades we'd be all dead. Yeah, but what about that flying guy using slug throwers? Another clone questioned. Those things haven't been used in well thousands of years. They aren't that effective. Chalk mused. But Lieutenant Wilson is a damn good fighter, so that's all that matters right now. He's used to this, isn't he? Another clone whispered, this one still wearing his helmet with thunderbolts on both sides of his helm. Huh? Jolly said. What do you mean? He's been through war before. The clone went on. He is a captain, Bolt. Chalk said. Don't think he got that rank by just loafing around like the Republic was prior to the war. This is Admiral Chatta of the Naboo fleet. The sudden scream of the Admiral through the comms startled the entire group of clones, with many jolting up to their feet. The Separatist fleet is punching through. The Admiral shouted frantically, explosions going off in the background. More ships jumping out from hyperscopes. Steve had been staring up into the sky, saw a large foreboding ship makes its descent down towards the planet's surface. We need to move now, Steve said seriously. Get a call out to all troopers and have them fall back to the palace. We're gonna be sitting ducks if we stay here. Copy that, Chalk said, placing his helmet back on and turning on the open channel to all Republic forces. This Corporal Chalk of Jackknife Squadron, all Republic forces are to retreat back to the Grand Palace and regroup for the oncoming Separatist fleet. Repeat, all Republic forces fall back and regroup at the Grand Palace. As soon as Chalk finished relaying the message, explosions went off around them, Vulture and Hyena droids zooming past overhead. Move, now. Steve barked out with all clones now going into a full sprint back to the palace. All around them the droid fighters were dropping bombs, while Republic flyers did everything within their power hold them back. It was a combined effort of both the anti-aircraft guns and the Republic fighters, in staving off as much Separatist air power as they could. The droids seemed more coordinated this time around, as they had specifically targeted the anti-aircraft guns. Whilst the fighters did their damnedest in fending off the droid fighters, Steve Rogers ran with the clone unit that he had been fighting with, making sure to hold himself back as to not get ahead of them. A large explosion went off behind him with the sounds of pain shouts following after. Turning back, Cap saw several clones were now on the ground with a few being motionless. Rushing over to them, Steve along with the still standing clones, checked over the fallen with enemy fire going off around them. He checked the pulse of two, gritting his teeth at getting no responses from them before going over to others. Some were already being held to their feet while one other was still unmoving. Chalk. Jolly was hovering over him when he glanced up to see Steve approaching. He's alive, sir. Jolly reported grimly. But he's unconscious. Boom. Steve saw the shadows of falling rubble, and instinctively stood over Jolly and Chalk, with his shield raised and body tensed up. Get your head down. Steve yelled in time as large rocks and rubble began falling atop them, with Cap's shield managing to take the brunt of the falling debris and successfully protect the two clones. Once the miniature avalanche of rubble subsided, Steve gestured Jolly to move aside and in one quick motion, hefted Chalk up and over onto his shoulders. Jolly could only balk slightly at the great display of strength. How are we doing, troopers? Steve asked aloud to the rest of the clones. We can move, sir. Ram spoke up, holding Bolt's arm around his shoulder. Unconscious and wounded up front and move fast, Steve ordered. I'll cover the rear. Then I'll back you up, Jolly stated firmly. Steve only nodded in appreciation. The group of soldiers began running at a more rapid pace, even though half of them were now injured. The raging aerial battle above went on all the while, the battle becoming much fiercer by the second. Captain America kept running with the palace in the distance. Hey Cap. Up above, Falcon descended down with the clone unit he had been traveling with coming around the corner. Ear twitching, Steve looked over and squinted at small movement barely noticeable to most eyes. Scott. I'm here, Cap. Scott's voice chimed in through the comms. We're getting hammered all around us, Cap. What do we do? Get back to the palace first, Steve said. It's still our best line of defense right now. Are you sure? Positive. The sounds of other running footsteps were heard, and they were joined by more retreating clone troopers that had gotten the message of retreat. Double time it, everyone, Steve said aloud. Move it now, we're in the home stretch. Above Naboo, Separatist ships were engaged in a heated and violent battle against their Republic counterparts, each side fighting tooth and nail against one another. Both had displayed exceptional brutality against each other, and neither showed signs of relenting. Though the Separatists had called in reinforcements, they still had to fight with a great ferocity, as the Republic defenses had not shown any signs of bending to their onslaught, and each ship that bypassed the blockade was at a cost. Observing all of this was Darth Tyrannus, otherwise known as Count Dooku, the leader of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. He watched the naval engagement with an analytical frown, taking into account the mounting losses both sides were suffering from. But taking Naboo was not the only reason as to this attack. Are you sure this is wise, Master? Very, Tyrannus. The holographic projection of his master, Darth Sidious, spoke with his sinister presence. This attack will continue to display a great deal of the Republic and the Jedi's incompetence in dealing with the Separatist army, as well as help in furthering our plans. Be that as it may, I feel Dr. Vindy's work to be irrelevant with what we're doing as of this moment. Is it due to the disturbance in the Force, my apprentice? Sidious inquired, headed face turning to him. Dooku only remained facing forward, face impassive and eyes narrowed. It had only been a few hours ago, but that literal Force shockwave had remained present on his mind for some time now. That was unlike anything he had ever felt before, and had never been as truly troubled as he was in the Force, as he had been at that very moment in time. Before he could even consider contacting his master, Sidious had beaten him to it. While he had displayed his typical calm, imposing aura, it was easy for Dooku to pick up on his master's own state of mind. Yes, my master. Dooku confirmed for the Dark Lord. The Force had never sent out such a warning like that. It was more than a warning, my apprentice, Sidious said, face looking down to his native planet below. There is a great change that is beyond either of our control, as well as the Jedi's coming to this galaxy. We must consider all our options, perhaps even hastening our own plans. Dooku's response was unable to come as an incoming call from the surface appeared before him, sharing a momentary look with his master. Before he could speak, his own apprentice Asajj Ventress appeared in front of him looking worn out with singed spots all over her clothes and skin. Master. Asajj spoke in a slightly strained voice, noticing Sidious beside Dooku. Lord Sidious. What has happened to you, my apprentice? Dooku asked, troubled at seeing his trained assassin in such a state with the battle only in its early stages. I encountered someone down on Naboo, Asajj said, using something in her area as a means to rest. Or rather, I encountered 3 individuals down in the palace that defeated me with skills and powers I had never seen before. Both Sidious and Dooku shared a skeptical look. What do you mean, Ventress? Dooku asked in seriousness. Explain yourself. I think it would be better if I showed you, Asajj said, turning to her side and speaking with a droid-off transmission. Play what you managed to recover from the palace's security recordings. Roger, roger. Before long, a video playback was given depicting what had been retrieved. And suffice to say, both Sith Lords had varied responses on what they were seeing. The one flying didn't seem all that special at first, given most people being able to do such things with jetpacks. Yet he displayed a certain aptitude and naturalistic ability with those overly enlarged wings that certainly showed his own talent for combat. Then there was the shield bearer, and he had moved and fought with exceptional skill that clearly outclassed Asajj. His movements in a fight and fluidity in going from throwing his shield, fighting hand to hand and casually catching his shield and going back to fighting with it in hand was seamless. Practically moves that were much like that of a Force user, given certain adjustments. However, the one that oddly stood out the most was a man that literally grew from a small size from seemingly nowhere, and knocking Asajj back with utmost ease. These 3 men had beaten back Asajj within a matter of seconds, showing that they were cut above the usual kinds of combatants the assassin had faced. Sidious was stroking his chin now in thought, while Dooku only gave the playback a hard stare, as it was paused on the 3 men standing tall against his apprentice. Sir? Dooku blinked and looked to a red-accented droid turning his head to him. What is it? Republic forces are coming out of hyperspace. Dooku sharply looked up in time to see the arrival of a dozen more Republic Venator warships appear out in hyperspace, with more warning signs blaring all around him. Sir? The same red-tinted droid spoke. Multiple Republic forces coming from the rear and the west side. We're getting surrounded. Scowling now, Dooku began barking out orders. Form up our defenses. Concentrate your fire upon the weakest fleet and punch a hole. We must retreat. But sir, a capital ship is now planet-side with orders to take the Palace of Theed. The red droid stated. Leave it to its fate. Sidious stated, leaving no room for argument. It no longer serves a purpose. Roger, Roger. The droid said. Dooku in turn instructed his apprentice. Get off the planet by any means necessary, my apprentice. We must reconsider our next set of plans. At once, my master. Ventress said with a bow of her head before ending the holo transmission. This changes things. Sidious remarked, looking to Tyrannus. Do you believe those 3 men on Naboo to be the source of the reverberation in the Force? Dooku asked. They may hold the cause to it. Sidious mused. The Jedi have sensed the same thing, of that I am sure. Then what shall we do, master? We must discover if there are more like these men. Master? Just leave the system and await for further instructions. Dooku wished to ask more, but knew now was not the time for such a thing. With a bow, Dooku acquiesced to Sidious's orders, and began to move his ship and fleet toward the rear. He now faced Jedi Master and General Plo Koon, and his 104th Clone Battalion. All the while, Anakin Skywalker along with his former master and his apprentice, had arrived on the scene with Sakura and Koon, immediately engaging the enemy forces. That's Count Dooku's ship. Obi-Wan had instantly picked up on the presence of the former Jedi turned Sith. What do we do then? Ahsoka had asked. Anakin opened his mouth to respond when he received an incoming call from the other 2 Jedi generals. Isla, Plo. Anakin greeted on his wrist-mounted comm. Glad you guys are as punctual as we are. If only we had time for pleasantries. Plo stated. We need to get down to the planet's surface now. I had just received information that a separatist capital ship is hovering over the city of Theed. If we do not move fast, the city and all its inhabitants will be leveled to the ground. Isla said on her end. She was already moving with her commander, Bly, down to the hangar bay. Skywalker, you, Kenobi, Ahsoka and Isla head down to Naboo now. Plo instructed. I shall deal with Dooku and Separatist fleet up here. Set Jedi nodded in response before making their way to their transports. Rex. Anakin switched channels. Are all units prepared and waiting? Down in the Resolute's hangar was Captain Rex with the 501st Legion, and Commander Cody with the 212th Corps. We're ready and waiting, General Skywalker. Rex responded, seeing the last of the AT-STs get hooked up to dropships. See you in a second then, Rex. Back on Naboo. Padme Amidala was on the front lines of the defense of the palace, making sure everything was going well with citizens getting inside. Many were coming in droves, either in one piece or herd along the way. The separatist droid army was now sending in wave after wave of clankers, with many landing just outside the range of Theed's remaining defensive AA guns. Clones were essentially set up in suicidal positions as they provided cover for the civilians still entering the palace. Originally, the defensive line was a wide berth of nearly 5 blocks, with military forces standing over the civilian safe zones. Upon the droid army breaking through and sending a capital ship down to Theed, that all changed into a mad dash scramble to get all to the palace. There were some bunkers of civvies and clone troopers on the outskirts of the city, but they were instructed to hide out, then risking the lives of the people. The ones that hadn't gotten the order to lay in wait were instead told to get to the palace, and within range of its defensive guns, as most around the city had been neutralized. Their air power had also been all but taken out with only lot gunships available, with many considering using them as ways of evacuating the civilians. Easier said than done. Padme shot down a couple more droids, when the growing familiar sight of a red, white, silver relay, and blue shield ripped through the robotic soldiers, bouncing around the battlefield until returning to its owner Captain Steve Rogers. Giving the good captain a nod of thanks, Padme resumed in her firing at the battle droids, while Steve rushed in to fight them off barehanded, which amazingly proved to be quite effective. Above him, Lieutenant Sam Wilson the Falcon flew at top speeds weaving through the enemy fire and providing support overhead, thanks to thermal detonators he had snagged up and his own pair of DC-17 blasters. As for Scott, this is POW not exactly crack what I had in mind when I joined the team. Upon an occasional random droid, body parts were smashed left and right. Hull ones were even flung all over the place, with the neighboring ones being outright confused with what was happening. The way their fellow droids were being destroyed made a few of the B-1s panic a bit, as the unseen force just smashed them apart with no rhyme or reason. As much as the three newcomers had provided a great boost in holding back the Sis, Pad knew that it would only be a matter of time until the palace defenses would be overrun. The senator could only pray that the Republic would get here in time and alleviate her home planet of an enemy it had once been subjugated under a decade ago. With a renewed fire in her eyes, Pad went on a greater offensive, pocketing her personalized weapon, and grabbed a DC-155 carbine, and blasted away at the droids at a more rapid pace. She didn't need to look to her side to know the clone troopers and Naboo guards had moved to back her up, as she saw more blue and green blaster bolts fire off behind her at the droids. Steve Rogers in the meantime stood in front of a now injured Pack, who was being held by his comrades Jolly and Rook back behind defensive lines. His shield had proven to be effective again in deflecting the blaster bolts, managing to send a few back at the shooters. Falcon saw his friend in trouble, moving to assist him. "Cap, we can do this all day, but unless this Republic isn't gonna come soon, we're all just holding back the inevitable." "I know, Sam," Steve said in frustration, lashing out to grab a B-1 by its scrawny neck and throwing it at another few B-1s. "But right now, all we can do is keep fighting." "Incoming tanks," a random clone shouted. The line of tanks were now seen coming right towards them. Several were immediately destroyed by detonators and rocket launchers, but the rest began firing back, devastating the clone's defensive line. Falcon dived down to one of the tanks, priming some detonators and throwing them down the primary cannon. Kaboom! Padme and Steve were now fighting alongside each other with Sergeant Buck and Rook when an Ott targeted them in mind. "Fire at the senator," the nasally voice of the droid commanding the tank ordered. "Get back," Steve roared, jumping forward to protect Padme. Suddenly, Ant-Man grew to full size in front of them and chucked a tiny disc at the tank. "DVVRRMM. Well, where'd it go?" "Holy crap, I can't believe that worked," Scott Lang exclaimed in awe. "That actually worked." "What the hell was that?" Sergeant Buck yelled in bug-eyed disbelief. Walking forward, Ant-Man bent down and picked up a small-sized tank which rested at the palm of his hand. "Oh, I just shrunk it down." "Just shrunk it down," was the collective response of the clone troopers and even Senator Amidala. Steve on the other hand chortled at their responses when he noticed that the shooting had stopped around their area. There was still a firefight over on the other side, but it appears that both sides within this vicinity were momentarily stunned into pause, as to find a way to process what they had just seen. "Did you know they could do that?" a clone asked Sergeant Buck, who only shook his head in silent shock. Scott all the while was observing his new little tank and the tiny B-1 battle droids that had jumped off his hand in an attempt to flee their new giant overlord. It was then that he got an idea. "Oh, hey," Scott said to a nearby trooper. "Can I borrow a grenade?" Without getting a response, Ant-Man snagged the explosive and tossed it to Cap. "Hey Cap, aim for this disc I have in my hand." "Why?" "Trust me, it'll be good." Choosing to follow his fellow Avengers' order, he reared his arm back before throwing it once Scott tossed the small disc rather high. The two objects soon made contact before. "DVVRRMM. Roger, roger," was the meek final words of one B-1 battle droid at the side of a now gigantic thermal detonator. Kaboom! The explosion rocked the whole area and utterly devastated the battalion of battle droids Steve, Scott and Pat were fighting. Besides, from a large portion of the tanks destroyed almost all, there was quite the massive hole made in the middle of the clearing leading up to the Capitol Palace. Padme tried saying with a twitch of her whitened eyes. "I don't." "Senator." Steve's firm voice cut through her stuttering, making her look to see a rather amused Captain Rogers. "I think it's best for you not to dwell on it. Otherwise, you'll be here all day." Padme blinked, trying her best to school her features, yet her mouth opened and closed several times, until she finally stammered out. "Why yes, of course yes, let's not dwell on it." "Blah, gunships," Rook abruptly shouted, pointing above. "It's the Republic." "Oh, thank the Force," Padme breathed out. Looking back up, she looked at the clone troopers. "Don't relax too soon. Naboo's citizens still need to be brought to safety." "She's right," Steve said in agreement. "We can't let up now. Even with reinforcements here, we might get overwhelmed and defeated without them getting here in time." The defense of the palace commenced once more, a renewed offensive defense on the droid army. Lot gunships plowed through the fighters of the Sis, going down directly to the palace, while others engaged in taking on the separatists' air forces. 2 gunships dropped off 2 at Tess, whilst the rest deployed reinforcements in the form of the 501st, 212th and 327th, all being led by GD. Many clones yelled out with glee and relief. And leading at the vanguard, heading straight towards the palace, was GD Master Obi-Wan, GD Knight Anakin and his Padawan, Ahsoka. "Looks like we got dropped right into the fire," Ahsoka commented, deflecting blaster bolts left and right. "Just the way you like it, Master. You know me oh so well, my young Padawan," Anakin said whimsically, moving to slash apart a few droids close by to him. "Don't get too excited, Anakin," Obi-Wan jokingly chided. Right behind the 3 GD were Captain Rex and Commander Cody, blasting away at the separatist droid, leading their men by example. Rex saw a droid aim at Anakin, and wordlessly shot him down without any prompt. Skywalker saw this at the last second, and looked back to give his captain a grin of appreciation, which Rex nodded in return. "Palace is just ahead, Masters," Ahsoka said to Anakin, who sculled his expression, leading his men in Padawan forward. Coming closer and closer, the group soon stopped when seeing not only the destruction near the palace, but also... "Whoa, what caused this whole? Your guess is as good as mine, Rex." "Anakin." Skywalker snapped his head at the source, smiling when seeing his secret wife coming towards him. As she got close, he quickly buried the urge to embrace her. "Padme," he happily said. "Glad to see you are alright." "I should be the one saying that," Padme said, looking to him and then Kenobi and Tano beside her secret husband. "You don't know how much it means to me you all came to my home planet's rescue." "Senator." Padme turned around, and it was now that the trio of GD and their clones laid their eyes upon a very strangely garbed man jogging up to her with a perfect circular shield in hand. "Captain Rogers." Padme nodded her head, turning back to the GD and clones. "Everyone, I'd like to quickly introduce you to Captain Steve Rogers. Him and his men have been aiding the people here and protecting all of us." "Really now?" Kenobi said with intrigue, taking a moment to analyze this Steve Rogers. "Hey Cap." All heads then turned up, with those unfamiliar either blinking or tilting their heads at the sight of a man sporting metal wings fly down to them. Landing beside Cap, the flying man spoke with him. "Those new gunships tore through the droid forces. They're in disarray." "Glad to know that," Steve said, looking to the GD and clones. "Much as I'd like to get to know you, we still got a battle to win." "Agreed," Anakin and Obi-Wan said at the same time. The odd collection of 2 Avengers, a Senator, 3 GD and their clone units, moved to engage the remaining droids' forces still in the area. "Say, what caused that hole back there?" Ahsoka innocently asked, voicing the same thought as the newcomers. "Oh, you can blame Scott for that," Sam answered. "Who?" "Tic-tac. Tic-tac. Over there." Sam pointed over to a group of droids marching towards them. "The Ant-Man." "I don't." Ahsoka quickly shut up when seeing a man wearing an unusual suit appear from nowhere, only shrink down and disappear from sight. "What?" Droids suddenly began to jerk about violently, being hit by an invisible, when the Ant-Man grew in the center of the droids, greatly startling them. Grabbing a droid by its arm, Ant-Man moved in for a hip toss and shrunk down in the process. It added more momentum and power to the throw, which flung the poor droid forward, all the while having its arm torn off. He then batted several droids left and right with the severed limb before disappearing once more. Ahsoka and even Rex, Cody and the clones were all staring at what they had just seen, trying to make sense of it all. "Is that what my face looked like?" Padme whispered, asked Rogers, who shrugged. "Pretty much the same. Except they didn't see the explosion." "Noted." "Skywalker, Kenobi." A female voice cut through the battle, and both GD saw it was Ila Secura, cutting a swath through the droid forces over to them, being backed up by Commander Bly and the 327th Corps. Steve had also taken a moment to see who it was coming towards them, and couldn't help but find the alien girl really. "That's a lot of blue," Steve murmured to himself. "Nice of you to join us, Ila," Anakin joked, lightsaber deflecting more blaster bolts. "Apologies. We had to take a detour." Bly couldn't help it, Ila teased. He just loved the scenic route. "The architecture is surprisingly sound." Bly couldn't help but go along with his general's joke. The GD and clones were now fighting in complete unison, completely decimating the Sith army. Arc-wings, Z-95s and lot gunships were beginning to turn the tide up in the air, while several Venator-class Star Destroyers and Acclamator-class assault ships moved to engage the separatist capital ship over Theed. Back down below, the trio of Avengers helped with the newly arrived Republic forces in completely wiping out the remaining droid forces who were now in full retreat. Cap was fighting alongside Isla Sakura, Commander Bly and Ahsoka Tano, taking down a squadron of super battle droids. "We're pushing them back, General," Bly said to Sakura. "Good," Isla said with determination in her eyes. "Grenades," the clone shouted with several prime detonators in the air sailing towards them. Before any could respond with evasive maneuvers of the Force, a blue blur of swords shot forward and caught the grenades with his shield and slammed them to the ground. The grenades exploded with a slight amount of force nudging Cap up a bit, but leaving him and the surrounding troopers and GD unharmed. "Whoa," Bly whispered, a sentiment shared by all, including Tano and Sakura. "Thank you," Isla said sincerely. The battle went on for an undetermined period of time, but by this point, it was nearing sunrise. Some who had been battling for so long hadn't realized that a near entire day had gone by with the brief invasion of Naboo. Republic forces came down in droves with food and medical supplies, along with many other resources in assisting the Republic allied world. All the while, the GD, their clone counterparts, the senators and queen were all in the meeting hall of the Grand Palace. It was a circular room with a circular holo table. Right now, all aforementioned parties and individuals stood around the table with everyone's eyes on three people specifically. "You have our eternal thanks and gratitude in assisting Naboo in its time of need and fighting back against the Separatist army." Obi-Wan Kenobi spoke for the assembled Republic Party. "I can't express to the three of you what this means to the people of Naboo," Padme said earnestly. "Well," Scott said coyly, only to get silenced by Sam nudging him. With that being said, Anakin went on. "I think the main question on everyone's mind right now is, well, just who are you people?" Obi-Wan ran his hand down his face, slightly cringing. "As much as my friend here lacks his tact, I do find myself agreeing with him." Steve, Sam and Scott exchanged glances, silently speaking with one another. "That's a bit of a long story," Sam stated. "And to be honest, we've got some questions of our own," Steve said. "We threw ourselves into a war we know nothing about, honestly." "Then why did you fight?" Isla couldn't help but ask. "We couldn't let innocent civilians die in a battle they have nothing to do with," Steve said in total seriousness. The GD, clones and senators couldn't help but balk at the declaration in slight awe and admiration. Perhaps then Obi-Wan spoke up after several seconds of silence. "We could help one another then." "How so?" "Exchange of information," Obi-Wan said. "We tell you what you want and need to know, and you tell us exactly who you are. We can even tell you about the war and everything in between," Anakin added. "You've earned that much after helping out while going in blind. And if you need any assistance, feel free to ask," the Queen of Naboo stated. "You have all been champions in protecting my people, it's the least I can do." Seeing that they at least had options now, Steve stepped forth. "So, what would you like to know?"